I want you to imagine the stereotypical American man in 1960. Maybe you're imagining a white picket fence, steady job, 2.5 kids, wife, home. Back then, success had a blueprint. And what it meant to be masculine had sort of a roadmap, a playbook. And now picture the traditional American man in 2025. Maybe they're still living at home with their parents. Maybe they're doing gig work or don't have work. They're delaying their relationships and these other kind of big milestones like home ownership. And you can see that somewhere along the way, the roadmap sort of broke down. And so the question is, what happened and what is filling that void? I'm a financial expert and I talk about money psychology in the context of cultural and social issues. And I want to talk about one of the biggest financial threats to young men and one of the causes, I think, of the masculinity crisis. And it's something that's hidden in plain sight on every young man's phone. 25% of men under 30 bet on sports online. That is 1 in 4 men. And you can compare that to just 6% of women in the same age group. I think this is not just about sports or really money. I think it also is about what it means to be a man when traditional paths to success have disappeared. And I think it is the crisis of masculine identity being monetized by billion-dollar companies. When I first started researching this, I was expecting to find a story about gambling addiction. And what I found was something much deeper, an entire generation of men whose psychological needs for achievement, risk taking, and self worth are being systematically exploited by apps that are designed to replace the traditional markers of masculine success. So today, I want to talk about how the collapse of traditional masculinity has created the perfect conditions for the betting epidemic, how gambling apps specifically target male psychology, and why this represents one of the most dangerous forms of financial exploitation in America today. And this isn't just about individuals and affecting individuals' bank accounts. It is reshaping how an entire generation of men think about risk, reward, and what it means to be successful in America. So let's start with the numbers. 25% of American men under 30 bet on sports online regularly. Young men under 35 are also 3 times more likely than older men to engage in risky gambling behaviors. This represents a complete departure from historical gambling patterns. Traditional casino gambling is skewed older and more evenly distributed by gender. This new wave of gambling, especially around sports, is young, male, and digital first. But what's really concerning is that this gambling surge is also happening during an unprecedented mental health crisis among young men. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for young men under 35, and this group faces record levels of anxiety, loneliness, and depression. And so the correlation with economic desperation is also unmistakable. And so you take this mental health crisis and couple it with economic desperation, and then you see how this creates the conditions for a gambling epidemic. Home ownership rates among men under 35 went from 45% in 2000 to just 34% in 2024. Real median wages for young men have also remained essentially flat since 2000, while inflation, costs for housing, and education have surged. Harvard researchers found a direct correlation between declining economic opportunity for young men and rising gambling rates. So as traditional paths to prosperity and wealth building have become blocked, as the idea of the American dream has sort of died, gambling has become the sort of substitute route to feeling successful. This is coupled with the rise of the gig economy, and over 60% of gig workers under 35 are men. And if you are a gig worker, you often lack stable incomes and kind of the quote unquote societal respect that comes with traditional employment. And this economic precarity creates the perfect psychological conditions for gambling exploitation. So you have this group of young men, they're facing unprecedented anxiety, loneliness, depression, and all of these factors increase susceptibility to addictive behaviors like gambling. Like I said before, when you combine economic desperation with social isolation and mental health struggles, you create a population that is psychologically primed for exploitation. And gambling apps didn't create these vulnerabilities, but they are designed to exploit them systematically. To understand why gambling has become so appealing to young men, we need to also understand what they've lost. So for generations, masculine achievement followed a very clear pattern: stable career, home ownership, investing, being a family provider. And they weren't just economic goals. They were very much tied to what it means to be a man, identity, self-esteem, social validation. A man who owned his home, had a steady job, could support a family was considered respected in society. And I'm not saying that that is valid, but that is kind of what the stereotypes and kind of what the societal conditioning was at that time. And these achievements, like having a job, having a home, were visible, they were measurable, and they were socially recognized, markers of masculine success. And men statistically take more risks than women, but in the past, risk taking happened through entrepreneurship, career advancement, long-term investing. The stock market was seen as a place for building wealth over decades, not gambling for quick wins. Today, young men face economic conditions that make a lot of that traditional masculine achievement nearly impossible. Millennials and Gen Z men are economically disadvantaged compared to other generations. For example, take the gig economy, which has replaced stable employment with more precarious work. Uber drivers, DoorDash delivery workers, freelancers. A lot of these jobs don't always provide the social status or financial security that has traditionally built masculine identity for previous generations. Also, take homeownership. This has traditionally been the cornerstone of masculine achievement, and that's been priced out for a lot of people. The average down payment now exceeds $50,000, which is unaffordable for a lot of young men. And so then into the void steps gambling, which is specifically designed to provide the psychological rewards that traditional masculine achievement used to offer. Betting apps kind of offer this illusion of control, empowerment, and instant validation through kind of winning big. University research shows that gambling allows men to quote unquote prove themselves, a substitution for traditional forms of achievement that are no longer accessible. And so much of the language around gambling is also sort of tied up in masculine identity, like think like betting on yourself or making your own luck. And this language is not accidental. It is kind of psychological, and it sort of targets men who feel powerless in other areas of their life. Gambling apps aren't just hoping that men come across them and use them. They are specifically designed to exploit male psychology in sophisticated and very predatory ways. These apps often intentionally use masculine coded aesthetics like sports imagery, competition themes, dominance hierarchies. Harvard's Behavioral Design Lab has documented how every element from color schemes to notification sounds is designed to trigger a specific dopamine response in male users. And the gamification of these betting apps is particularly insidious. If you think about little tricks that they have, like streaks and badges and leaderboards, and these create an artificial achievement system and a sense of community that provides the psychological rewards that many men are not getting from traditional sources. So things like betting groups that are embedded in these apps normalize gambling socially among young men. So it becomes not just about the money, but about status within male peer groups. Barstool Sports really represents the perfect case study in how gambling has been packaged as masculine identity. You think about how that brand is built on sort of bro culture, bravado, competitive masculinity, kind of framing gambling as a way to have male bonding. In addition, celebrity athlete endorsements also creates an illusion of proximity to elite masculinity and success. So when Tom Brady or LeBron James promotes a betting app, they're not just selling gambling, they are selling a version of masculine identity. And research shows that athletes' endorsements particularly influence young men's perception of betting as culturally desirable and masculine. So these young men see gambling as a way to participate in the same competitive arena as their heroes, so to speak. The gambling industry spends more on marketing to men 18 to 34 than any other demographic, with strategies specifically designed to tie betting to masculine identity, social status, and peer approval. The gambling explosion among young men didn't just happen in a vacuum. It is the direct result of economic conditions that have made traditional success impossible for an entire generation. A recent poll found that 70% of men under 35 believe that economic opportunities today are worse than their parents' generation. And so if you take the traditional American dream, stable career, buying a home, having a secure retirement, that has become in many ways economically impossible for many young men without something like family wealth. So when those legitimate paths to achievement are blocked, the psychology of desperation kicks in. Young men become vulnerable to any opportunity that promises to bypass the system, even when the odds are terrible. So if you are feeling powerless in this economy, betting offers a psychological sense of taking control, of actively trying to improve your situation, even if it statistically makes it worse. But overall, the story of young men and the gambling crisis doesn't have to end in exploitation. There are healthier ways to address the psychological needs that gambling apps are exploiting. Reframing masculinity towards disciplined investing and skills-based achievement provides a better, sustainable path to financial success. The mathematical reality is that patient, consistent investing will always outperform gambling over time. But this requires redefining masculine success away from quick wins towards long-term. Throughout my research, I spoke with financial therapists, cultural commentators, and young men who have been affected by gambling addiction. And their insights really revealed the human cost of this crisis. A lot of these young men aren't just gambling with money, they're gambling with their identity and self-worth. I think a lot of these stories illustrate this broader pattern where gambling has become a substitute for authentic achievement, but it ultimately just leaves men more powerless and defeated than before. The surge in sports betting among young men isn't really about sports or gambling. It's about what happens when traditional paths to masculine achievement disappear and predatory companies move in to exploit the psychological vacuum. And this really represents a fundamental crisis in how we define masculine success and achievement in America. And until we address the underlying economic and social conditions that created this vulnerability, young men will continue to fall victim to this manipulation. So the solution requires both individual awareness and systemic change. We need to rebuild economic opportunity, redefine masculine achievement, and hold some of these companies accountable for potentially predatory targeting of vulnerable populace. If you found this deep dive helpful, please like and subscribe and share it with somebody that would find it interesting. My name is Hannah, and have a good rest of your week.